In this chapter, we'll look at different types of loops used in PHP. Loops are an important labor-saving device for executing the same code multiple times. The most basic type of loop is a while loop. It consists of the keyword while followed by a condition in parentheses and a block of code in curly braces. As long as the condition remains true, the code inside the curly braces is repeated. The loop comes to an end when the condition is no longer true. So let's see that in action. This is while.php, which you can find in the chapter 505_01 folder of the exercise files. On line 3, the variable I is initialized to 0. This is one of the rare occasions when it's acceptable to use a single letter as a variable name. By common convention, I is used as the counter in loops. If you need more than one counter, it's common to use J and K. The condition inside the parentheses on line 5 tells the loop to continue running while I is less than 10. Then the code inside the curly braces increments the value of I and then displays I along with an HTML BR tag, and if we load this page into a browser, it displays the numbers from 1 till 10. Sometimes you want to break out of a loop early. To do so, you can add a conditional statement inside the loop and use the break keyword. So let's add a conditional statement after displaying I. Then if I equals 6, then we'll break. So if we save that and reload the page in the browser, we display 1 to 6, then we break out of the loop so nothing else is displayed. You can also skip an iteration of the loop using the continue keyword. To show how that works, let's use the modulus operator to divide I by 2. So I'm going to comment out this conditional statement on lines 9 to 11. And then add the new conditional statement before displaying the value of I. So if I modulus 2, then we'll continue. As explained in the previous chapter, the modulus operator returns the remainder of a division. If a number is even, dividing by 2 produces no remainder, in other words 0, and 0 is treated by PHP as false. So this condition will fail when I is an even number. But if I is an odd number, the remainder is 1, and that's treated as true. So whenever I is odd, the continue keyword will stop the current iteration before I is displayed and immediately go back to the top of the loop. So if we save that and reload the page in the browser, we display only the even numbers. I've used the modulus operator here simply to show how the continue keyword skips the rest of the code in the loop. There are, in fact, other more efficient ways of processing only even numbers, but a really useful example of using continue would be when processing the contents of a file line by line in a loop. You could use continue to skip blank lines. A variation of the while loop is the do while loop. In a do while loop, the condition comes after the block of code you want executed. So you begin with the keyword do, a block of code in curly braces, and then while followed by the condition in parentheses. It's also important to finish with a semicolon. Where this differs from a while loop is that the code in a do while loop will always be executed once, even if the condition is never true. So let's see how that works. This is do_while.php, which you can also find in the exercise files for this video. On line 3, I is initialized to 100. Then we've got a do while loop. Inside that loop, I is incremented, then it's displayed, and finally we've got this condition while I is less than 10. So if we run this in a browser, it displays 101 and then stops. So we're starting at 100, we increment it, but the condition is while I is less than 10. So we execute the code inside the curly braces once, but this condition is never true, so it just stops running. But if I go back to while and initialize I to 100 here, save that and run this in a browser, nothing is displayed because the condition prevents the loop from running even once. The danger with the while and do while loops is setting an impossible condition. For example, if I reset this counter here to 0 and were then to comment out this line 7, in other words, to forget to increment inside the loop, it would never get to 10, and that would create an infinite loop that will either freeze the computer or cause the browser to crash, so don't try that. The while and do while loops are the most basic types of loops. With a while loop, the condition is assessed at the start of each iteration, and the loop continues until the condition is no longer true. If the condition is false to begin with, the loop never runs. On the other hand, a do-while loop always executes the code in the loop at least once because the condition is assessed at the end of each iteration. We also looked at breaking out of a loop with the break keyword and skipping the rest of the current iteration using continue. Break and continue can be used in every type of loop. Let's take a look at using a for loop. The main advantage of a for loop is that it's less prone to generating an infinite loop than while or do while. The basic syntax looks like this. The loop is controlled by three expressions that are separated by semicolons, and they go between a pair of parentheses after the for keyword. The first expression is executed before the loop runs, and is normally used to initialize a counter. The second expression sets the condition that determines how long the loop should run, and the third expression is executed at the end of each iteration of the loop and is normally used to increment the counter. It sounds complicated, but is actually quite simple in practice. Let's go to an editing program and use a for loop. This is for_loop.php, which you can find in the chapter 505_02 folder of the exercise files. In this file, I've created an array of characters from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The information is hard-coded above the doctype declaration here, but it might come from an external source such as a database. So let's use a for loop to display the characters' names in an unordered list. So we need to create a PHP block between the UL tags in the body of the page. That's on line 14. So we'll have our PHP block. And then inside there we need to create our for loop. Now we need a condition to control how many times the loop runs. There are 5 items in the characters array, so we could just hard code 5 into the condition. But very often you don't know how many items are in an array, and we can get the number by using count and putting the name of the array inside the parentheses. So let's do that first. So we'll call it num items, and then count, and between a pair of parentheses the name of the array, which is characters. Then we need our for loop, and the first thing inside that for loop is the counter. We need to initialize that, so I'm going to initialize I at 0. That's because arrays are always counted from 0. Then the next one is the condition for how long it runs, so we need I to be less than num items. And then finally we need to increment our counter, so that's I++, and then a pair of curly braces for the body of the loop. And all we need to do inside that loop is to display a pair of list item tags together with the current character. So echo, then we'll have a double quoted string, and inside there opening li tag, and then characters, which is our array, and then we need the number from the array, the index, and we get that from our counter I. So the first time that the loop runs, I will be 0. It will display the first element in the array. The next time it runs, I will be 1, and so on. So we just need our closing li tag and a semicolon, save that, and load the page into the browser. And there it is. It's created our unordered list in that for loop. In this example, I've set the counter to increment by 1 each time the loop runs, but you're not limited to that. Let's increment it by 2 each time. So instead of using the increment operator, it will be I, then plus equals 2. So if we save that and reload into the browser, it now displays every other element in our array. We can also run the loop in reverse. So let's just duplicate this line, and then we'll comment out the first version. And we need to initialize I at numItems minus 1. And then the condition, instead of being I being less than numItems, we need it to be greater than or equal to 0. And then I at the end, we will use the decrement operator, which is 2 minus signs immediately after the variable. So if we save that and then reload the page in the browser, we're now running that array in reverse. So we're starting with Slarty Bartfast, the last element, and Arthur Dent, the first element, brings up the last element in our reversed array. So with a for loop, all the controls are specified by the 3 expressions separated by semicolons between the parentheses at the start of the loop. This makes maintenance easy and reduces the likelihood of creating an infinite loop. The first expression initializes values at the beginning of the loop. In this example, we used only one counter, but you can specify multiple ones separated by commas. The second expression sets the condition that controls how long the loop should run, and the final expression is executed at the end of each iteration of the loop and is normally used to increase or decrease the value of counter variables. The for each loop is designed to handle arrays and certain types of PHP objects. It can be used in 2 different ways. The first gives you access to the value of each array element. The syntax looks like this. The first point to note is that for each is written as one word. It's a keyword, and if you put a space between for and each, it won't work. Inside the parentheses, you add the name of the array you want to loop through, followed by the as keyword, and then a temporary variable or alias that stores the value of the current array element each time the loop runs. So let's see that in practice. This is foreach_01.php, which you can find in the chapter 5, 05_03 folder of the exercise files. Above the doctype declaration is an indexed array called characters. Let's use a for each loop to iterate through this array to create a bulleted list of names. So between the UL tags in the HTML, on line 14 we need to add a PHP block. And inside there we'll have our for each loop. And it's the characters array that we're looping through, then the as keyword, and each array element is a name, so we'll use name as the alias. Then the body of the loop, in there we need to echo, and we'll have a double quoted string, opening li tag, name, that's the alias for each element as we go through, closing li tag, a semicolon, then just save that and load it into the browser, and there we have that indexed array which is displayed as the unordered list. As the name suggests, a for each loop accesses each array element, and it's much simpler than using a for loop for an indexed array, as long as you want to process each array element in order. However, a for loop is better if you don't want to loop through the whole array, or if you want to process it in reverse order. The other way of using a for each loop gives you access to both the key and value of each array element. Using the for each loop like this is particularly useful for associative arrays, and the syntax is very similar. After the as keyword, you add 2 temporary variables separated by the same operator as used to create name-value pairs in an associative array. The first variable stores the key of the current element, and the second one stores its value. So let's see this in practice. This is foreach_02.php, which you can also find in the exercise files for this video. Above the doc type is an associative array called descriptions. So let's use a for each loop to display these descriptions as paragraphs in the HTML. So under the h1 tag, we need to have a PHP block. Then inside that PHP block, a for each loop. Then we're running through the descriptions array, and we need the as keyword. And then we'll have the key, the double arrow operator, and the value. Then inside the loop, we need to echo, and we'll have a paragraph tag inside a double quoted string. Then we will have the key, some literal text, and then the value. And of course, we mustn't forget that we need a period at the end and then a closing p tag. So if we save that and then load this into the browser, we get those 3 paragraphs. Earth is mostly harmless, Marvin is the paranoid android, and Zaphod Beeblebrox is the president of the Imperial Galactic Government. So we've been using the key here, followed by is, and then the description. So the for each loop offers a convenient way of looping through every element of an array. In its basic form, which we had here in foreach_01.php, it stores the value of the current array element in a temporary variable. And when used with an associative array, you can define 2 temporary variables, one that stores the current element's key and the other one for each element's value.